Hello. And here we are today with our guest Nina, the FACTfems, to talk about how to get justice for women behind the scenes. Hello, Nina.
Hello, VF555. A pleasure to be on your space that I've been able to hear about over the last year I'm up in Canada, eh?
Well, we're very happy to have you here and glad when we met each other through FEMAX. Always got to give a shout out to the ladies there.
Yes. That's a Thursday Zoom for anyone who's not sure.
Yes,
and
anyone who wants to join at the FEMAX.
Contact information for FEMAX if anyone does want to join that Zoom. So very few people actually know anything about me and who I am. And I am a Canadian lesbian who was out since the 1990s.
I want you to tell our story.
Yeah, so for my lesbian credentials, this is a copy of the December 1992 Angles, which this was the very, very first edition that the word bisexual appeared above the logo of the newspaper. In fact, there was even a page 1 article that was done as how to be a bisexual woman in the gay and lesbian community, which the University of Victoria Press republished at that time. And that was the first time that had happened in Angles. By happenstance, I was on the cover. I was the lesbian news editor. And Angles published from 1980 and ceased publication in 2004. In 1992, this edition, bisexual was added after 3 months of meetings.
It's good you told bisexuals how to be bisexual.
Yeah. Well, it was about the difficulties navigating. The best line in that was, being bisexual is a good way to not get a date on Saturday night. And, you know, that sort of remains true. And this is the era where bisexuals were sort of deemed sexual tourists. And the phrase lesbi-gay became part of the lexicon and was used in American press, and Angles adopted it with this edition. It's important, what I wanted to say, though, was after that happened. Now, that took 3 months to do. And during that time on the collective, I was the only lesbian and everyone else was gay men. And so decisions on a consensus-based collective was, if you took a bus, then you could not argue your issue to a decision, then you lost because those who had cars could stay later. Or those who lived close to the center who could walk would always win. So I was accused of being bisexual, and I was confessed to by being bisexual. So the gay men knew who the bisexual men were. And so now that a lesbian knew, it was out in the open, and I made them, have to, to vote on the collective to all agree it should be done, by saying that we'd have to actually remove some of the gay men who were bisexual from the collective, and then we wouldn't have quorum for the meeting or a newspaper that month. Was how I was able to accomplish that as the only lesbian in the group.
It's a good thing that us lesbians have always been fighting for the bisexuals.
Yes. Well, a lot of us did date bisexual women, and because, well, it's the same biology, the sexual orientations are in fact different. In Canada, so the way that trans ended up getting added before the paper was finished publishing was the collective did not agree that it would happen. And my understanding was that the trans person simply said, I will take the paper to the press. I will take the paper to the print shop that's going to, like the newspaper print press place. And after everybody left, simply added the word trans throughout the newspaper.
They just threw it in there.
Yeah. That actually wasn't where I was intending to start, but it was sort of the best way to introduce myself. And the only other part I'd like to say about the cover was this was a photo shoot that was done in August. And it was because the guy who was the gay man who was the photographer found his new boy toy and promised he could launch his modeling career by getting him a newspaper cover.
I was wondering about that.
Yeah, and the compromise was that a lesbian also had to be on the cover. And
I would think so, because it's right under the word les. I see a man there. I'm like,
yeah. And in this, he's reading a Tom of Finland book, and I'm reading a Katie Lang biography, and there was actually 3 photos taken. And
that's you?
Yeah,
awesome.
Yeah, so I'm reading a Katie Lang biography. So so the one photo that was picked was me looking at what he's looking at. And the other opposite photo that could have been picked was him looking over my shoulder to see what I was reading.
That would have been much more effective for us lesbians.
I actually wouldn't have actually picked either one of those pictures. The picture that should have been chosen was him trying to put on a triangle on top of a Christmas tree and me holding the Christmas tree, rolling my eyes so hard at his utter incompetence. And on, I can...
you don't want to show that.
Well, I can actually show that picture. I have the 3 10
I
by
want
4, 10
Let's
by 4,
show it.
and I've actually put them on my, I don't seem to have access to a chat, or if I'm still in settings.
No, that's okay. If you don't have a physical copy.
No, I do have a I do have a physical copy. I just didn't prepare them for hand holding, but I do have a website link that I can that I can share.
Throw it into the private chat, and I will direct everybody to it.
Yes. Okay. No, I do. No, so I just didn't leave settings. That was what I was confused.
So let's start at the beginning. With your childhood.
Yes, I wanted to say I'm doing a campaign in Canada right now, owing to a Canadian politician named Sheila Copps, who was my teenage childhood. The reason I mentioned her is because she recently said that children should trust men and what men say. So this goes to my childhood. If I had listened to Sheila Copps when I was 5 years old, a bisexual man who dated into my family would have raped me and my younger sister when I was 5 behind the barn at my grandparents' farm.
Wow. That's
and what happened was I'm 5 years old, and a man who has dated into my family has found me and my younger sister behind the barn at my grandparents' farm and said, let's play a game that starts with taking your clothes off. And I knew of no such game that started that way.
No such game should with children.
No such game starts that way.
No
such game starts that way. So
I'm for lesbian twister, but only with, women that you have a with.
No, I'm talking about 5-year-old. Let's not
no, exactly.
Here. Let's keep this for this moment. Let's please keep this for 5-year-olds. There is no game that starts that way. And I stepped in front of my younger sister and I told that man if he did not let us return to the house, I was going to scream. And his face changed from an expression I did not understand to one that I did understand, because his face went very white and he became afraid. And I went back to my grandparents' house and I didn't tell anyone what happened because I did not understand at 5 years old what happened. In the car on the highway, my dad finally got me to tell him what happened.
Wow.
He turned the car around on the freeway. To be clear, he did not drive to the next exit and turn around on the freeway. In a 1970s Volkswagen, he did a U-turn without braking on the freeway over the median to return to my grandparents' farm.
I would have been driving to kill him.
It took my grandfather and my teenage uncle to stop my dad from getting charged with murder that day.
That's basically the correct response.
Now, because of that incident, when I was 12, if I had believed a man who walked up to me on the street that he did not know how to do a commercially available model that you could buy in a model store that I had just walked out of on Sapperton Street in New Westminster, BC, the last time anyone would have heard of me would have been at age 12, because I encountered a man who named himself the Beast of BC. He is Canada's most infamous child serial killer, Clifford Olson. And he pretended that he had met me before, and I knew I had never met him before. And no adult walking by on the street thought anything of a man talking to a 12-year-old girl.
I would. I'm like, if they're not related.
Clearly not related to her.
Yeah. Stranger danger. This is what we all got brought up with.
And he asked me to help him do a model. And he put his hand on my arm, and I said, I'm only allowed out for 20 minutes, and I'm already 5 minutes late, and my mom is on her way to look for me because she knows where I went.
That was great to see.
He then let go of my arm and began to back up his face went just as pale white, and he ran away down the street. And that was
They don't want to get caught.
12 to experience.
Predators just don't want to get caught. And if you let them know you're aware of what's going on, they don't want you.
Yes. And now, fortunately, in both of the cases of the men I met, the first one that I met at 5, within a year, died in a motorcycle crash, single motorcycle crash that he caused himself.
Couldn't happen to a better dude.
Exactly. Now, the second one was actually arrested by police a couple of weeks later. And he died in prison where he belonged.
Unfortunately, not before he had murdered and attacked many children.
Yes, so many children that they didn't even charge him with all of them in order to prevent encouraging other men from being trying to create a new leaderboard. And I only really wanted to share that part just because I know that very, very few men who are predators are nice, and they absolutely do not respect any internet space anywhere. So anyway, so from that, it is in many ways unsurprising that I later worked for the Canadian Royal Mounted Police in Canada. In the 1990s, the decade I was out when I was on the cover of the Angles newspaper, which I forgot to share, when I went to go rent the Santa Claus suit in August, the middle-aged-ish older lady who was running her costume rental place out of her living room of her Vancouver house did not want to rent the Santa Claus costume to me when she realized I was going to be the one wearing it.
Why?
She wanted to rent me the Mrs. Claus costume because only men can be Santa Claus. And
no, anyone can be Santa.
I explained to her that I needed this costume in August for a cover of a newspaper article. And it was up to her whether that article would include going to the BC Human Rights Commission or Tribunal to sue her for $5,000 for hurt feelings for her refusing to allow me to rent at her shop that is available to the ordinary public.
Yes, that's how money works.
Yes, that is how money works. And because we used to be illegal and women were property, we used to have less rights. I mean, last century, lesbian was the love that dare not speak its name because illegal, which this is a poster from the Forbidden Love from the National Film Board of Canada, 1995 documentary.
Before we were non-men.
Where they...
The Forbidden Love that shall not be spoken.
Where there was an acting part, and then there was actual interviews with lesbians. Let me see if I can do this where they're all closer, wrong edge of the...
A little bit lower. A little bit lower. I mean...
Okay. I'm trying to find which is the edge. Okay, which is the edge with the actual women? Okay, here we go.
The opposite edge.
Yeah. So all of these actual lesbians from the 50s talking about what it was like to be a lesbian in Canada. Here we go.
I wish I could interview them all. I really would.
Yeah. Well, if you just watch this documentary, you'll hear all their interviews.
We could send a link on that for me. I will send it to the audience.
And this one is Amanda White. She's from BC. I've had the privilege of meeting her 3 times. And I also got to meet one of the production, Eileen Wasserman. She was the director. I live in Vancouver, so you end up getting to meet a lot of these people. So now, as for actually, are there any questions?
Live watch we could do in the future.
Are there any more questions in the chat before I get to the really the
juicy stuff?
Yeah.
The hardworking turf.
I'm not sure. I mean, I've sort of been thinking of, I just don't, I haven't, I don't know how much of, I haven't let you talk very much on your own.
Don't worry, we're in no rush. And this is your interview. I want you to tell your story.
Okay, so I grew up in Canada when women were no longer property. Well, women were still property when I was younger. And in the mid-'80s, before I graduated high school, the Canada Charter of Rights was done. And so women were supposed to have rights. We could
All
have
of a
bank
sudden.
accounts, and we could incorporate nonprofits and do all the stuff that women were doing in their living room and their kitchens to help women get access to health care. And when I only wanted to date women, suddenly it was legal to evict me. It was legal to fire me from private sector work.
I've had that
And
problem.
yeah, I began my paycheck life as a newspaper delivery kid for the Vancouver Sun, the local major daily. And I then worked in a video store that had a porn section that rented videos, VHS and beta. And I was a very bad feminist in that decade because I also worked at an adult video store that
Oh no, I'm not going to shame you for your past.
videos
Trust me, I'm not.
and novelties. And from there, I ended up working at a company called Video 9 Distribution that actually sold the legal pornography across Canada as each province was deemed it legal. And I was actually fired from that job when the owner of the company found out I was a lesbian. And actually, this was
a porn company fired you for being a lesbian.
Now this wasn't actually my most favorite epic quitting. Well, I didn't quit because I was fired, but my fired exit line. We worked at one location at the bottom of Fraser Street in an industrial park, and then the boss wanted some coverage of decency factor, so he bought out a video store and moved the operation. So we had a regular video store that had an adult section, and the distribution company worked at the lower level of the building. And he had a teenage daughter in Catholic school.
Oh no!
Why? And
porn store owners.
Yeah, so I was working for him because I'd worked in the video stores and met his salesman, and I moved up from video clerk to office manager of this distribution company. And
now they just hire you to be the lesbian porn. I mean, that's really the direction it would go in this conversation.
Well, this is the funny you should say that, because I worked for him and then I left working for him to go to the Vancouver Film School, and he actually, my employer told me, go learn how to make lesbian porn so I don't have to deal with Canada Customs. We can make porn in Canada. So I go to film school and I'm trying to get film jobs. I can't get film jobs, but I can always go back to my old jobs because I always left on good terms. So nice. I returned to the distribution company.
I think lesbians have to work harder to keep these jobs.
Yeah, and so then he finds out I'm a lesbian, and so 4:45 on a Thursday, he walks down the stairs, and there's some guy I don't know walking behind him, and he's got a check in his hand, and I've never seen him with a check in his hand because one of my jobs was making him sign checks. I begged the phone company to put a past due notice on all the bills just to get them paid. They wouldn't do it. So he says, you're fired. This is your replacement. I don't want you anywhere near my daughter, Jackie. And I said, John, your daughter is 12 years old. She's not my type, and she's 12 years old.
I know how that goes. I mean, I know how people are ridiculous. They paint lesbians as predators just because we are lesbians.
He was a single dad, custody of the daughter. He brought her to the office so I could be her role model. It's why he bought the video store, so there was a wholesome environment that she didn't know what his real business was.
Yeah.
So I said, John, it's your fault. I'm a lesbian. I went to film school. You wanted me to make lesbian porn. I had to do research, and you've already made Jackie a lesbian too. I took the check. And I said to the guy, all the stuff is over there. He's an asshole. You're next. Bye. And that's the end of the training. And I walked out of work with 8 minutes on my clock still. Best quitting ever. Or being fired ever.
Well, however you want to look at it. You didn't belong there.
No, and I was fired. I need to be honest. He fired me for reasons I could not go to the BC Human Rights for because it was legal to fire you. I know.
It's more than legal. Trust me. It's legal to fire me for being gay.
Yep.
Places that accepted gays, they just didn't want you working there.
Yeah. And so in Canada, the government had a government security policy that they enacted in the 1950s so that the other nations would take Canada seriously as a nation after World War II. Even though Canada was taken so seriously, we had our own beach on V-Day. And Anyways, I ended up after the retail, I ended up being in the nonprofit sector, where one of the
Tell us more about that.
organizations that I was at was the Vancouver Women's Health Collective. Now,
That was your first objective, is to get into health?
Yes, the Vancouver Women's Health Collective started in the 1970s and helped women get access to health care for women and their families.
And it was actually focused on women at this time.
And there was a library of books. There was clippings
Amazing.
from news and media on women's health and going back, all decades of information. And most importantly, there was a doctor directory, where women would walk in and they could fill out a form about what their experience of their doctor was and any medical practitioner, and there was files on it, and we'd help women find doctors. In addition to that, university students, social workers, nurses would join the health collective to do their studies and then publish under the Vancouver Women's Health Collective.
Important work.
And they did stuff on the downtown east side, and they were in several addresses in Vancouver. Now, I ended up being involved in the 1990s. I was unemployed from a print photocopy shop because when he could not ignore I was a lesbian, because he knew I was a lesbian when he hired me, because he checked my records, which included angles, because that was my experience. So I got fired from the print shop, but I got him to actually lay me off because I walked in and I said, "You don't want me here. I don't want to be here. Here's 35 jobs I can apply to if I'm on unemployment," because the unemployment office in Canada would give, they could give grants to small organizations. We just need someone for 6 months to do a project. So I left the employment of the print shop to a government grant to work at a nonprofit where I was, there was 3 of us who were employed on these grants, and mine was doing a database indexing of all those library books and the doctor directory and the referral phone line to all of the women's organizations across the province of British Columbia.
How big was that?
Yeah, I mean, there was over 300 women organizations in British Columbia. And it'd be like, so a woman could phone the crisis line. I didn't work in the front end. So there was a crisis line, and there was space where other women's, like midwife organizations, would rent office space. And so all these women's groups could actually have offices instead of being in their kitchens and
they all had offices. They all had them filled with women. This is like heavenly.
Yes. Now
the first thing to push for.
Yeah. Now the building that it was in when I was at the Health Collective no longer exists. The building has actually been torn down and replaced with a much larger building. I walked past it recently at 8th and Pine. But at this place, if you can imagine, because this is how to understand Vancouver, as you can think of Vancouver and BC as if New York and LA had a baby city, it would be Vancouver.
Oh God, well, that's a lot of work.
Yeah, and Seattle is our sister city, so Pacific Coast, Pacific time zone, yay.
So this was a time when everything was progressing for us.
So in the 1990s, at the Health Collective, a 3-story building. The top floor was Birthright, an anti-abortion, religious, anti-women group. The second floor was the Vancouver Women's Health.
There's always some anti-woman group surrounding us.
The Ladies Against Women. In Canada, REAL Women was an active right-wing women's group. And in fact, at the Health Collective,
too many enemies of our own among us.
Yeah, the Surrey Women's Center was setting up, and they were afraid the REAL women, which were women at least, we're going to try to infiltrate, because this is what ends up happening. I mean, it seems like it's
whenever we move forward, there's infiltrators that want to drag us right back into the kitchen.
So they phoned, and so we were helping other women's organizations set up. So in this Pine Street and 8th, the Birthright, the Vancouver Women's Health Collective, and then the main floor that had the majority of the parking spots was a massage parlor, sex operation.
Oh, great.
And it was in the lease.
That should have never happened.
Well, it was in our leases that we left each other alone. So my best day at the health collective, and we had 4 parking spots, is I saw a Cadillac parked in one, and I knew I did not need to walk around. No one at the health collective had that.
That is a pimp.
Yeah. So I phoned the towing company, and I had it towed.
So happy.
Yeah, 3 hours later, someone from Birthright knocked on the door and said, "Do you know what happened to our insurance man's Cadillac?" And I said, "Yes, Buster's Towing. If your car is missing, call them." And they were so upset that I didn't come up and ask them. And I said, number 1, our lease says leave each other alone.
Right.
And number 2, I don't have to look for someone who does not belong here, because I'm the only person in the health collective with that day, which I also didn't need to check. So it was like my car, someone else's car, and I don't care. We still have 2 empty spaces. That car does not belong there.
It's not yours. Tow it.
Yeah. So
I'm glad you did that. You get an extra star.
It was very satisfying. Let me just take a breath here and just find that link I was going to show you about the three photos comparing for the angles.
It's all good.
Yeah, no,
I'll put in notes for after the stream.
The private sector life I can easily talk about, but it's the next part that's the exciting part, because part of the promo is I spilling the tea, and okay, here's the link for the 3 different photos about angles, so you can actually see which cover you would have preferred, because I think the Christmas tree with the triangle would have been the most pointed picture.
Okay, let's see if I can get this into the chat.
Yeah. Oh, is it in private chat, or I meant to put it?
Yeah, it's in private chat, so I'm sharing it with the regular chat.
Oh, yeah, because it's actually easier for me to not look at chat while I'm talking.
Don't worry, I got it under control.
Yes. No, I'm everyone from WDI will enjoy that comment and my laughing, because I'm often the one posting the most in the WDI chat. So, so after the private sector, nonprofit, in the 90s, I was also in the Vancouver chapter of Lesbian Avengers. I'll do stories about that other time, because I'm going to stop.
Oh, we need a whole chapter on the Lesbian Avengers.
Yeah, because we really just want to get to the really good part of government. So,
we have time. Don't worry.
Department of Justice, you'll have to let me know if you will invite me to drop in at your office at 8:40, or as I have offered to do. So I began working in the Government of Canada in 1998 at Revenue Canada, everyone's favorite department.
Revenue, that's where the money's at.
Yeah, well, in that capacity, I marched in the Vancouver Pride Parade before that, when it was still a protest.
I remember
as part of Angles. I walked in the Pride Parade when it became
we used to counter protest and harass
the Lesbian Avengers. And in 1998, I was in the very first group of federal government civil service employees who marched in a Pride Parade in Vancouver, or probably across Canada. And
because you were part of the community. Is that because you were paid to, like?
Well, it wasn't that we
sponsor it.
It was first because we were revenue employers, and nobody likes the revenue agency, so it's okay. But it was at that time, the parade was still mostly community groups or businesses that wanted our money, unions that were pretending to support us, politicians who wanted our vote, and PFLAG. The group that was how we ended up getting rights. Some of us mattered enough to the heterosexuals that they said, hey, why does my kid not have rights when everyone else's kid does? But here we were, a civil service group. Nobody.
I remember when parents wanted gay acceptance and not to convert you.
Yeah. Now, what it meant as a civil service employee to walk in the very first time, was we represented hope. Because, hey, we could now work for government when we didn't used to be able to work for government from the 1950s until 1992. If you were,
it was like golden, it gets better days.
Yeah, you were fired. So in the 1990s, you know, this was a pivotal change in society. And, you know, it was a really amazing moment.
I remember the 90s, man.
Yeah. Now, after Revenue Canada, I worked at RCMP, and I am wearing an RCMP forage cap, and it used to belong to a butch corporal that everybody at work pretended wasn't a butch corporal.
Why did they pretend she wasn't butch?
Well, because everybody didn't see that stuff. Everyone in that work is, you are the work, you are not yourself.
Well, we didn't want to be seen.
And,
we didn't want to be seen as anything else other than another employee.
Well, yeah,
we
and this, you know, this was an era where we were still not using pronouns because that's how we avoided detection that heterosexuals. It was part of the hetero code. Anyway, so we were at lunch, and I was the only person in the room that was not in a uniform and did not have a gun. And the butch corporal said, "Nina, you keep saying that you want a forage cap, so why don't you just go to depot," meaning sign up, and get the whole uniform.
And then you got the cap.
Yeah. And I said, I waited, I glanced around the room because, as I said, they all had guns, and, you know, people take themselves very seriously. I waited to make sure no one had food right at, like, no one was going to do a spit take or choke on food when they were going to laugh at what I was about to say. So what I said was, it's really more of a fetish than a lifestyle thing for me, as a joke.
Right.
Now, everybody laughed because here we are in a boardroom at RCMP, and here a naughty joke has been made, and a very naughty joke. Oh. So many laughed, but one male corporal did something I did not know the human body could do. He blushed.
Oh.
And I do not mean his face turned pink. He did a full body blush that started at his diaphragm, and that I will describe as a Rocky Horror.
Please do, because I don't even know about this.
He went like this, like deep body. No, it makes sense.
I used to do that with some of my ex-girlfriends. Sorry.
Yeah, no, it makes sense if you also know how absolute rage works, about how the blood circulation changes. Mm-hmm. And so he blushed so hard that joke hit him somewhere I don't even want to think about. So the next day, I got an email from the butch corporal summoning me to her workstation. And I was very nervous because I didn't know how much trouble I was in. So she said, "I have been allowed to give you my forage cap. With the badge has been removed. You can see there's no badge.
Oh, you got officially removed.
Normally there's a badge. Normally there's a badge there, and you can see where
took your badge of honor.
Yes. Well, she said, "I have been given this hat to make sure I never make that joke again, and at work, that I never make that joke at work again."
Well, I prefer they kept the inappropriate stuff out of work than nowadays.
There was no onus that I recall that I could not share that joke with others. And the badge was removed to make sure I could not go out in the street and impersonate RCMP officers, because that's a crime to do. And I've actually, this has been sitting on a shelf for so long. Anyway, you know, I've never, anyways, it was just a joke.
Obviously.
So, and after RCMP, I went through some other departments. I had an acting assignment to Indian and Northern Affairs Canada. I returned to RCMP, left for Industry Canada, and that was during that employment, the government of Canada changed to the Harper government. And another purge of the public service was on, and I ended up getting workforce adjusted at that in the second purge. And worse, I ended up, because I knew computers, I actually did the spreadsheet that allowed that to happen. And that was more than I meant to share on this, but oops.
You learned your way around on the spreadsheet.
Yeah, I know how to use all the spreadsheet. I know how to use all the office software, although it's a bit nauseating to do so. it's not just format, it's content as well. I left Industry Canada and I ended up briefly working at Immigration and Refugee Board. Then I worked at Service Canada, and Transport Canada was my last department. And at all 6 first departments, I was actually getting the family benefits, and was, as a common law and then married lesbian, I was able to, at Industry Canada, use the marriage leave code. There was a leave for civil service employees to get married and have 1 week off once in their career.
That's nice.
And yes, it was very nice, but not if you were already married, not if you never married. So very few employees actually got to have access to this. In fact, if you worked at RCMP, you had to have your superior officer's permission to get married, and there were discharges for those who got married. Yeah, that was actually just quite interesting to see the paperwork of departments. And at Transport Canada, suddenly my code was changed to single when I was still married, although I did end up getting divorced.
Very confusing.
Which was honestly the only paperwork that obtained the desired objective. Because
I want to talk about how the change has started happening in these government agencies.
Well, in the 1990s, there was, in the early 90s, there was a man named Brian Mossop, who was one of the first cases that the Supreme Court considered. He was partnered with a man named Ken Popert. Oh, this was a good question. Ken Popert was the main guy at the Toronto local newspaper, Extra.
Okay.
Now, Ken Popert's father died, and so Brian Mossop filed a grievance to access bereavement leave for basically his father-in-law. And that case ended up leading to the benefits that heterosexual employees were then given to gay and lesbian employees. Now, Canada had...
That was very important for us.
Canada, at the start of Canada, and Canada's legal entity status is it is a dominion. We are in the Dominion of Canada, and we have a Westminster parliamentary system. Women were property. Women in Canada were not able to get the vote via the court system here. They had to appeal to the British court, who sent down the ruling to Canada saying you have to give women the vote.
Okay.
Various provinces had given the women voting when there weren't enough men because of wars being sent overseas to wars. There weren't enough people
wars bring death to men, but they bring rights to women.
Yes. Well,
despite what's happening.
When the election doesn't have enough voters to make it look like a real election, then we'll let women vote was and so then that just eventually became law. So part of the reason why Canada created the Charter of Rights was we separated from England after that, so that the Supreme Court of Canada was the Supreme Court of Canada. There were no courts above it.
Okay, so we're moving forward now.
Yes, the Supreme Court of Canada, I invite everyone to look up. They wear robes that are red with white trim. There are 12 of them. And at Transport Canada, in addition to lesbian, the grounds upon which I was bullied and discriminated against across my public service career, despite it being quite a remarkable 7 departments, most civil service employees work in 1 department for their whole career. And I worked in 7 in 13 and a half years.
Wow, you got your way around the system.
Well, I had enough skills. When I got workforce adjusted, I filled out the form of all my skills.
Before it was multitasking.
Yes. Well, sorry, I should explain. In the government, when you get workforce adjusted, you go into a database, and any jobs that become available, they have to be offered to you first. And then there's competition processes. So I filled out the form. They sent me the codes, and I filled out the form. And she called me in, and she said, "You have 37 job codes." I said, "Yeah." She said, "The average government... Yeah, the average government employee has 6 to 8. I said, "Okay."
Yeah.
And she said, "I'm going through your resume." And I said, "It's 10 pages. And she finished going through it, and she said, "Well, I was right. You do not have 37 codes. I said, I know. She said, you have 42 codes. I said, I know, because I left off the 5 clerical codes that make up the core of everybody else's 6 to 8. I am suing Canada for failing to hire me at my best possible work level as what they promised to do across all of the departments. In 13 and a half years, I interviewed in like 700 jobs for other government jobs. So
this has to do with you being a lesbian, right?
It partly does, because I grew up in an era where I was told there's no point for you having that interest or hobby because only men can career.
Right. They don't want you to reach the top. They're okay with you doing a lot of work for them.
Yeah, and
I went through that myself.
Yeah, and most women in workplaces, you know, they have power in the workplace because they're, you know, they're associated with males in the workplace more than the org chart. In Canada, in the government, they also have employment equity, which is similar to the American affirmative action, which recognized groups that were deemed under law to not be citizens at all, which were visible minority groups, which differ and should not be grouped under, you know, a generic heading. Disabled, into which any person can fall into that category by a genetic condition or by life circumstance or, you know, own misadventure more often than anything.
Yeah, it does happen.
And Indigenous, or, you know, and in Canada, Indigenous people were under the Indian Act that deny even individual person recognition. It is a group category into which people are grouped under a generic, you know, under a name. Rather than recognized as individuals.
So sad.
Yes, Canada also did have a slavery category, which no longer exists in Canada. And there was landed immigrants and refugees, which used to be called displaced persons.
Okay.
Each decade uses slightly different language. And what we have done over time is we have cushioned language so that it doesn't sound so bad.
So bad, right. They just use fancy words. I mean, that's just the way it went.
Yeah, shell-shocked became post-traumatic stress syndrome. And we also realized it is not just war zones that can cause this for people.
No. Okay, well, I was talking about the trans stuff. When did you start seeing this invade the government or public, you know, nonprofit services?
Yes, well, this was, so in the 1990s, I was at the Vancouver Women's Health Collective. I was in Lesbian Avengers. I was in Women in Film. I was in the December 9 Coalition. The December 9 Coalition was an ad hoc group that got called together, ironically, because of the BC Human Rights Tribunals and Commissions, where they went to the phone book after the Brian Mossop ruling, and they called all the gay, lesbian, and bisexual and trans groups that were listed in the phone book in the 1990s, where that was about the first decade or so that we could even get listed in the phone book.
So they were already included when we started getting called on.
Well, no, well, here's the thing. No trans groups showed up to that meeting. And what they were looking for were cases of, were you ever fired from a job? And I told them about the distribution, the porn distribution company. And they said, well, that was like a year and a half ago. So we only look for a year back. We can't, you're out of time. Like, you would have been a good case, but you're out of time on that.
That's so sad.
And so we said, well, we're not really interested in your agenda. We're more concerned about Kim Campbell, who was the justice minister at the time when the Progressive Conservative Party still existed, where they were trying to pass a Defense of Marriage Act, like the Americans had passed at that time when Bill Clinton signed the Defense of Marriage and Don't Ask, Don't Tell. And
so we're focused on gay rights at this point.
Something else from the Republican Party that, you know, gays and lesbians were a bargaining chip. But because Bill Clinton met with gay and lesbian groups in the White House on the books, that led to the formation of the International Gay and Lesbian Association. Now, this was an umbrella group of 168 groups that had intervenor advisory status with the United Nations. The United Nations in 1994 looked at that group's list and said, wait a minute, 30 of these groups are pedophile groups.
Whoa, that's
including NAMBLA. And the United Nations said, you do not get to have human rights advisory status. If you
this was back then when they actually drew the line that it was wrong.
Yes. And the International Gay and Lesbian Association had a big fight, meaning the lesbians said to the gay men, no, this is not okay. So the International Gay and Lesbian Association...
Gay men have always wanted to shut the lesbians out because they wanted to pass this.
Yeah, they kicked the pedophile groups out, and 20 additional groups that had the same membership. And this is where we go back to the name Ken Popert. Ken Popert of Extra in Toronto, the body politic and Extra in Toronto. He took Extra out of the International Gay and Lesbian Association in support of the pedophile groups. And his was the dad who died that Brian Mossop was the partner of. So it's like, oh, he helped get us rights, but now I have some qualms and concerns. And Extra had tried to work with Angles, but the gay man, Richard Banner, who was the queen of Angles and the only person who stayed at Angles from 1980 until 2004, when the final paper published on the back page, they had over 1,000 names of all the volunteers. Some of them weren't real because we didn't require real names because of the real world consequences of being known to be a gay or lesbian. Or I should say gay man and lesbian, to really reaffirm the word lesbian has your sex, biological sex, and your sexual orientation in one word. Whereas every other person who is a man or woman has to have another word to modify theirs. And the word man and woman used to so not have to say heterosexual.
No, exactly.
Part of the whole word playing games where all the words get rattled a little bit. And in the 1990s, I did remember seeing a documentary where there was two men who were in various states of medicalizing themselves to the degree that was possible in the 1990s.
Okay, that's when you first started noticing the trans.
Yeah, and they kept saying in the documentary, biological women, and I kept flinching at that because I don't need an adverb. And they kept complaining that gay men didn't date them because they were too much like women. And
but that's not what makes a woman.
Yeah, no. In terms of the, so I sort of...
It's not about what gets them up or not.
Yeah, so I didn't really think about it too much. And I went off and I was not really involved in the community because when you become a civil service employee, your security clearance includes your friends. And it's not like other people are risky. It also gets to a point of not really wanting to, you get very distant from people in a different way than people who are in the military. They're not really quite regular public, and it gets very difficult. Like if you're in a group situation and someone starts talking about something that's on the news, and you absolutely know what's going on, and you can't say anything, and you have to play dumb about it. It gets very difficult. Very political friendships in government, of course. Different ways. It gets difficult to maintain relationships. And as a lot of us know, we're in the active community at the bar or in the sports groups and all this stuff, and then you couple up and you get isolated, and then you break up and you each run back to the group, and it's like, oh, I need to find a new partner, and all the couples are afraid to be with singles, and we sort of all know this serial monogamy dance. And
when we had spaces where we had these issues, nowadays we don't.
Yeah, and
great 90s and 2000s.
Yeah. So as a result of being in government, I have been through a few processes now in disability retirement, and that includes a BC Police Complaints Commission complaint, which I complained against the Vancouver Manual to bring it in compliance with our CMP. I didn't want to explain that too much. I spent a decade at the Federal Human Rights Commission explaining to them that I was workplace bullied and with just words where it was on the grounds of the regular sexism because I'm a woman.
Yes, the added additional
Yeah, and then
Correct.
because I was a lesbian and I was actually tasked with enforcing policy, which, yeah, that's a lesbian wheelhouse. I was a lanyard lesbian. It was my job to make sure the building and people and data were secure for most of my career. And because I was a married lesbian.
You're definitely a FACTfem.
Yeah, because I was a married lesbian and I didn't go to work to make friends. I went to work to do work to earn a paycheck. And when I went to work, I just told, oh, happy cat and dog stories. I just have my little house in the burbs and I just putter around, and you don't really,
The very innocent
personal, because what happens is people who work in an
version
office,
of lesbian.
they go home and they complain about work, and then they come to work and they complain about home. And,
It's two different lives.
like straight people problems are just not my problems, but they keep making everything my problem. And, so it was woman, lesbian, married woman, married lesbian, and an unprotected ground of atheist. Now, the charter gives us rights to our own ideas and philosophies, and rejecting
we
ideas
should always
and
have rights to
philosophies-
our own beliefs.
Yeah, and so gender ideology is a poor belief that objective, ordinary human senses, no education whatsoever, is needed, and that is absolutely flies in the face of everything that every human culture that we currently know exists and
It's completely a lie.
Understands and knows today. And oh yeah, yeah, I had been interviewed by the legals team for the Tickle versus Giggle Girls, and I did say to the intake that
more about Sal's suit.
Yeah, so the only difference between sex with a man and sex with a trans woman, because the geometry and the biology only works out the same sexual activity, but trans women do abuse vocabulary as well. And
that's the only difference.
Yeah, and to pick on cotton sealing lesbians, where, let's just do a PG rated joke. We are the cunning linguists, and words do matter, and words were so denied to women. And we're
not allowed to use words if it doesn't suit the male agenda.
Yeah, we do not have to use words in the same disgusting, derogatory, and undignified ways.
Which is why we call non-men.
Yeah. Yeah, considering non-men, the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, CBC, covered the John Hopkins, calling lesbians non-men, and I filed a complaint with the CBC.
This is where we get to the turfing.
Yeah, so what you can do with media is you complain to the various media outlets, but also the associations of journalistic ethics.
This is where we need to go. We need to go to ethics.
Yes, we need to go to the Journalism Association and Ethics, and along with direct businesses, and chain stores are far more vulnerable because this is where most women shop, and we need to harness
this is where we got to go.
Yeah,
so
it's the business associations. So instead of each mom and pop store or little one or two locations of small local chains, going to the business associations that go geography one by one and just point out the obvious. First, men have not started behaving better. Men can leave cameras in bathrooms, and there are many media
that happens as soon as you let them in.
That. Yes, I in Canada, I point to the Hamilton, Ontario Tim Hortons. I mean, the most iconic of Canadian shops, the coffee and donut shop. So from a business to the business associations, corporate head offices of companies are good. In terms of government, like in Canada,
all these systems.
Yeah, we have human rights commissions and tribunals. I sent a mass filing to all of the BC medical colleges. I kept it within the province of BC. So the Doctors College, the nurses and midwife college, the psychiatry college, therapy,
get the word out everywhere.
Pharmacy. The pharmacy industry is why truth in advertising laws even existed in the first place, which was to get rid of, the iconic snake salesman, right?
Yeah.
The medical profession used to distinguish itself from quackery was because doctors fixed you and sent you back to your life.
Right.
You know, unless
Not
you die.
break you and make sure you keep coming back.
Yeah. Well, I mean, here's the thing, though. In
With like
Canada,
a hormone addiction.
there was a case of a psychiatrist named Dr. Tinehurst. He was whipping his women patients. 3 of them took him to court.
Yeah.
And the Supreme Court of Canada ruled that this was degrading, dehumanizing, and uncivilized, and he lost his license to practice.
That's
Now,
what you do.
cannot find a
close down
therapy
businesses.
place. Yeah, you cannot find therapy. 2019, I think, was the pivotal year for me to start realizing I had to peak. I had a sort of a vague, I'm a vaguely ally because the right wing is bad. You know, I'm just not thinking too much about it. And then I was in the company of a 20-year-old UBC student who at this time I'm 51. Okay. And it was said to me that I'm not an ally of trans unless I date one. And
that's the tipping point for most lesbians that I said,
excuse me? And then from the look on my face, unless you were raped, I said, okay, I do not know.
The only way to say no is if you were raped.
Yeah, I do not need a
must be violated at least once by men.
Dating. And what do you think is going to happen if I do not have a no to a date? Now, most importantly, for the kink crowd and those who think that there are kink rules, you do not get to pretend there is a safe word that stops sex when a no to sex is met with threats of violence in the first place.
Right. There's no meaningful consent if there's no meaningful no. I mean,
yeah.
Feminist theory 101.
This vague idea that, oh, if you see someone from a distance that you think might be attractive, you are now obligated all the way. No, that is not true.
No, at any moment. I don't care how attractive that person is, what you're feeling at the moment. If you feel unsafe or you feel like you're not into it, the word no is so easy.
Let me go back to this.
Really, I'm always like,
how are women supposed to go to the police and report for this sexual assault when the RCMP in Canada has 3 class actions on behalf of women who worked in the RCMP? I have actually failed to meet the threshold of all 3 of those class actions because it is mostly for women who were raped and assaulted by men. In the workplace, I was very rarely bullied by men. They did all of their stuff against me in the back room where I did not see or experience it directly. I was actually bullied primarily by heterosexual women who did not know how to bully a lesbian because they only really know how to bully other straight women.
Yeah, when they're telling you you're not attractive enough to get a guy, it has no impact on us. We're like, okay.
Yes. And the competing with the number of children I have had, and she could not do her little sex kitten routine, like this sort of stuff that they do for men. And
right, it's powerful on us.
And
they don't have any power that way, but you know.
Yes, and the lawsuits on all of the class actions are pretty much presuming the male as the perp because 99.8% of the time it's going to be. In fact, when I was the RCMP forms analyst at the Royal Canadian Mounted Police from 1999 I started until 2007, or when I, the dates don't matter, the years don't matter at this point. There was a form called the ED 301, Attending a Domestic, and the form had last been updated in 1985. So I was in around 2003 updating this form, and the form had on it the perp man. There was no other checkbox. And on the other side, it was woman.
No, our crimes.
And then there was actually another checkbox for a man. So the form in 1985 considered a man beating a woman as his domestic partner or a man beating another man as his domestic partner.
Which is 99% of the problem to begin with.
Yes.
So
now I had gotten a request
saying that women do this when they're men.
So I ended up, I got a request from someone in the field to do a particular addition to the form, and that request was actually denied by the policy center. Because there was already a way to do that on the form as it was. Now I had, because of angles, I knew about the BC Justice Minister in that decade was Wally Opal, and he had a report authored about domestic report. He was at the provincial level, so his domestic abuse report was mostly about straight couples. There was a chapter for gays and lesbians, which noted the police have no training. Because when you go to a domestic, the obvious is the obvious.
Yeah.
Now, what was sort of known in same-sex relationships is usually it's actually the reverse of heterosexual. It is the one who is the batterer who phones because their victim has finally hit them back.
Oh, wow.
So yes, in fact, I wrote for both angles, and I also wrote for Extra West. That work was paid while Angles was voluntary. Anyways, and I actually interviewed a lesbian who admitted she beat her partner. Yeah, and it was I got beat as a kid, and I don't know how to, self-manage myself. And
there's no excuse to that.
Yeah. Yes, and so because of that report and having a request to change the form, I ended up putting on the criminal side, it could be a woman.
It could be.
So I had the sad duty of making it possible to capture lesbian domestic abuse. So, not denying it exists. And
as you should.
Again, it's not too often that lesbians will over murder their partners. And
of course it happens.
I think most lesbians, we like talking to each other and processing feelings. So, I mean, this is why
it's way better. I know how it goes.
Friendly exes. So,
if you want to slap me, but I have always been like, I can push you against a wall, and you're gonna stay there until you stop getting mad at me.
Well, the 90s was the hair pulling dyke thing. So, in the 90s. In the 90s, we were more dykes. We were dykes because lesbians seemed 1970s and butch femme was so 1950s. But, this 90s was the decade we were finding out about lesbians from the 1950s, forbidden love.
We were celebrating that part of our culture at that time.
Yeah.
We finally could celebrate our culture as a voice instead of, something you needed to do to survive.
Yeah. So instead of doing another funny story from the 90s, let's just go back to the trans. So 2019, I also discovered the Magdalene Burns YouTube channel. And, at first when I was hearing about trans rights, I thought, well, what rights do trans not have? Because the rights that gays and lesbians won, which Brenda Mason was the lesbian in Canada who won the right for lesbians to serve in the Canadian military.
And there's always lesbians that won these rights. Let's just be honest.
Yes. Now, Joshua Birch is the gay man, and I have a slight connection with him in that after he won, he won his case to serve in the military. He did commit suicide on his 35th birthday, which is also December 25th. And I got the phone call at Angles to report the news to the community. So, I mean, I remember that decade of, being around all the AIDS activism, and AIDS was the only discussion.
That was a horrible decade for us.
Yeah. And,
so hearing homophobia.
And now because of the trans stuff and lesbians being subjected to cotton sealing, lesbian groups being kicked out of Pride.
That's where it went.
Yeah. In 2020.
We finally had a little bit of acceptance and they had to dial it back.
Yeah, 2020, I walked into Vancouver Pride. I was asked for my pronouns. I had a physical revulsion recoil, and I blurted out, you don't talk about pronouns, it's the hetero code.
Yeah.
And the woman waved her hand and said, "You're over 40.
Oh, does that change your lesbianism? No.
Yeah. 2022, I returned to the Vancouver Women's Health Collective. I was trying to find a place to volunteer. I remembered enough of the services. I thought I could get help. And I walked in, And they're in a different address now. And they had tried to start a pharmacy for women, Lou's Pharmacy. And when the trans lobbyists began to sue Vancouver Rape Relief, they also sued all of the women's nonprofits. In 2007, when Canada's government changed to a government with the party of the day in charge, to the Harper government, they removed equality from the status of women and defunded that department from 17 offices to 5. That caused a cascade of not funding women's groups across Canada. The Vancouver Women's was in a very weird situation where we could not get money from the status of women because we only looked at women's health.
Right.
And Health Canada would not give the organization funding because we only dealt with women.
They don't.
So Avon, the makeup company, phoned us up in the 90s and said, we'll give you money if you put Avon posters up.
Okay.
And we said, we're not putting makeup posters up. That is not part of women's health. So we said no to that money. When I walked in 2021, there were 6 makeup mirrors on the wall for men to do makeup. There was a very old computer offering library-style access to the internet.
This is how I got in, for the money.
Homeless population that is living outside of the address where the Health Collective currently is. And the library, the doctor directory, the clippings have all been shredded, destroyed. At the 49th annual general meeting, the executive director stood there, and the number 2 line item she was proud to accomplish was those makeup mirrors for men.
Wow, that's an accomplishment for women.
At the Health Collective.
Has nothing to do with health.
And then she said something at the top of her speech I found very baffling. She called herself a colonizer and claimed that she could create work. Then why is she at the Health Collective if she can do that in the first place? And all they did was destroy everything that was there for women, because this is...
And now it's a marketing tool.
Yeah.
To men.
When I found out, wrote to the BC Minister of Justice, who was then David Eby. He is currently the premier of this province. I wrote to him and I described this and said, this meets all hate crime legislation criteria, the destruction of documents, the derogatory language.
This is a hate crime against
I had no reply from him as Justice Minister, and I had no reply from him as Premier, and I was writing to the then previous Premier and David Eby. I have again written to the current BC Justice Minister. Her name is Nina Sharma, and she did not respond to me. The ministry responded to me by Canada Post, sending me 2 pages that I didn't plan to talk this much.
No, it's okay.
Okay, so here's the thing. So write to the business associations and businesses, corporate head offices, regulatory bodies, associations, and do write into government. Write into your department and state justice.
This is what we need to encourage more women to
Write to the government officials. Government is supposed to regulate business. Make them do their job. They are supposed to.
We need to appeal to all of them and
yes. So I wrote to
challenge their policies.
Yeah. So I wrote to the BC Minister of Justice, Nina Sharma, now, and I was replied to with a not letterhead, just 2 pages with text copied off the website telling me how to complain to government about government, and no signature block. So I wrote back and I said, I deserve letterhead and a signature block. And I ended up getting an email with a signature block. And they told me to go tell it to the BC Ombudsman office, but it's actually called the Ombudsperson office. And I'm going to make a point of that this is the mentality versus policy and where these things lag. So number 1, when you are writing in to any place, do not assume the person is drinking the Kool-Aid.
Right.
That
Because
they
a lot of
might
them
be
are
on the
against this.
teetering edge, and your letter could be the one to push them over.
We need to talk about all the community, all the policymakers, we got to give them permission to speak out against this.
Yes, well, this is the thing. Men behave expecting forgiveness, and women wait for permission.
I think this is why Lady Justice is often blind. You know,
yes,
showing her mask on.
Yes, whether Lady Justice is blindfolded or not is dependent on which way the law is read. Where they go equal to everybody is blindfolded, versus we look at the cases and we consider the socioeconomic status and all the different things that can be observed. Gender ID totally undermines witness identification of surviving victims. And it also prevents third parties who witness stuff from being able to describe what they see. And it even prevents police from putting out bulletins. How can you describe a person, what you can observe if we have to
be who's the perp?
Yes.
They say a woman, and you're not going to find a woman.
Yes.
You see a man.
Now, I've just put a link in the private chat if you want to share that one. The other thing about government is just look at the org chart. A lot of times, one department would exist, but another department might be, oversight committees. Every political committee has a women's committee. So it is worth writing in your own original, unique words, because if I get 100 form letters, somebody got some people to do some stuff. But if I get 100 individual letters differently worded, I'm going to pay attention to that. So it's original letter, form letter campaigns, and then petitions are last because it's really easy to get people to sign petitions.
Right, because, that's the laziest.
Yes.
You really have to put in the time.
Yes. Now, this Dyke Writer WordPress blog, I do want to say, I no longer do this blog. This is the last post, and this blog was before I peaked. I did not really talk about the issue very much, but yes, the learning about the disgusting part about lesbian dating apps being full of men and men being allowed to specify biological women, but lesbians are somehow not.
Yeah, exactly. We cannot have some options.
The worst part, so about this link, Julie Payette used to be a Governor General of Canada, and I have been suing the government of Canada because of their failure to employ me and basically bullying me out of the workplace. And I have been through the Federal Human Rights Commission, Federal Court, Federal Appeals Court, and I am waiting for a Supreme Court of Canada number. I wrote to the Governor General earlier, and I was able to get a response from her office, and I then ended up writing and encouraging her staff to file grievances against her if she was a mean girl manager, which they ended up doing, and she is the first Governor General of Canada who resigned. My telling her to resign and her staff filing grievances were certainly a part of it. Anyway, so she's now out of office. The system works. And I have not heard from the current Governor General, Her Honorable Mary Simon, who I ended up doing my second WDI talk about called, I'll just put the link in the chat. It's easier for me to find it. I totally forgot to drink my tea all this time.
Don't worry. You can take a pause. You're always so full of so much information. It's just like,
yeah, I have I've been by myself for a long time, so the finding out about lesbians not being allowed to be as part of the Pride Parade and the taking over of the Dyke March was quite a shock.
News to you, because older lesbians don't really keep up with what's coming out from the younger ones being forced on them and groomed into our community.
Well, yeah, and the elderly ones are also being held hostages to this idea that the teenagers are going to kill themselves unless these men can sexually harass and rape lesbians. Declaration. That multitasking thing sometimes
what's your time?
Perks. I do not want to say the word hope. So yeah, this was the. Sorry, it's a little bit of Kara Dansky. Here's the link for that.
Thank you.
Just to
I will
promote
share it.
WDI, I did sign the WDI declaration 2022 or three. I think I joined them in, I think, December 2022. And I was talking to Zan there, for those who know there, and I suggested I would like to actually talk about what was going on in Canada, like with the Vancouver Women's Health Collective and the law stuff. I'm not a lawyer. I do want to be clear about that. I am not a lawyer. I did work for lawyers. I have worked on matters with lawyers, but I am a bureaucrat. And as a bureaucrat, I can abuse words way more than barristers can. So
Use the words we have while you still have them.
yeah, well, words sort of lose all meaning when you're gaslighting. And this is what the essence of gender ideology is constantly rebelling against whatever is the norm. And then when you set up the new norm, rebel against that. And so this is why we are hearing, bizarre things like somehow gays and lesbians are the ones who've been terrible, on par with heterosexual men. And, I've thought about this. I mean, men who go to have sex with what they think is a woman and it turns out to be a man are fighting for, their own integrity, body integrity, and absolutely no consent. So the sympathy actually for me has really shifted, because the men who are doing this know those men don't want to. Gay men.
I have never been for rapist rights.
Yeah, I mean, gay men who joke that the difference between a straight man and a gay man is 3 beers. And to that, I go to the sex advice columnist Dan Savage, who is currently sitting at the desk of Dear Abby. He bought her desk. Dear Abby and Ann Landers were 2 American advice columnists who were sisters who didn't talk to each other. So he's the one who introduced that good game in giving and told people they had to, give one to their kinkster spouse from time to time instead of getting married. The other thing that really piqued me was dead name.
Yes,
I heard dead name. And I thought, what a stab in the heart to every mother and fathers to hear from their child.
It's a cult mentality that you're reborn into your cult self.
Yeah. So I would like to put
a way for sex offenders to get off.
Yeah, I would just like to interject a little heartwarming story here. When I was still a married lesbian, I was aware of a teenage boy who was gay, and he moved into my house one weekend, and his mother ended up showing up 2 days later to pick him up. And he was afraid to be out to his family, and he was a friend of my family. Is how I knew him. And so she tried to make him feel guilty. She said, he sent me a text saying he was okay, and he was at my house. And she said, what kind of thing is that okay to do? And I said, I can think of tens of thousands of parents who would love to get a message just like that. I said, he is a good kid and he can move in here if it's a problem for you. And she said no, and he went back home, and he got to move into the basement of the family home. And a few years later, he told me that his mom said that, she was glad that she knew, and that he did tell her, and that, they were still part of, their life. It's a different decade. It was different than last century, when most of us were kicked out or exiled or had to leave our families, exiled a lot.
I moved out when I was 18 because my family was not ready to accept me.
Yeah, I mean, I was at Angles, and when Extra and Angles didn't work out a deal, because Angles was being, the gay man Richard Banner was a Trotskyite socialist, and yet he was the only person who was there from 1980 until 2004. He was why I left and didn't stay, partly, but also there were no other lesbians at the paper, and I was a lesbian wanting to lesbian. I didn't want to hang out with gay men. It's heart-wrenching how many lesbians now really regret, having helped gay men with AIDS, and I don't blame them. I kind of regret the time
they rejected. Decency, just sort us out, keep us out of pride. I mean, this is what we got in return.
Yeah,
we get to do all the work, and they get the stage.
Yeah, and this is what's happening now. Lesbians are supposed to be doing all the work
Yeah.
and the men getting the benefit. You know, we used to have the Lotus Club in Vancouver, which was a lesbian bar, and you know, I didn't go often enough, and now it's not even there. And
No, all our bars closed.
yeah, the
None of
cotton
them
stealing
cares.
absolutely ended
Until
Pride. I
Aiden
mean,
started invading their spaces.
yeah, I mean, when it was a protest and then it became a parade, that's when the kink came out. And you know, okay, funny story. I have a niece, and I took her when she was 6 years old to a Pride parade one weekend, and then the next weekend I took her to an RCMP.
You used to be able
event.
to take your kids.
Yeah, so I took her to an RCMP sunset ceremony. And so that was like an all-day event. There was like a bit of the musical ride stuff, and you know, it was really cool. And then I also took her to the Pride parade, and she got a lot of candy at the Pride parade because candy was being thrown.
Yeah, that was
And
recent days.
I asked her on the way after the second one which event that she liked better. You know, I thought, you know, she got candy, it's going to be the Pride
Okay.
parade. And she thought for a moment, and she said she liked the RCMP one better. And I said, really, why? And she said, because there were no ugly naked people.
Oh.
And I thought to myself, and because she was 6, I didn't share it, you know, and it's too bad the women at the RCMP can't say the same thing.
At that point, it was not for children.
Yeah.
To be taken.
You know, it's not something that I say to mock. It's you know, it's deadly serious. It's
our parties used to be just for us, you know.
Yeah.
The parties. The parade used to be for everybody.
Yeah. I mean, it was a protest, and then it became a parade, and this is why the Dyke marches ended up leaving. Was lesbians wanted our own parade. I was in the Dyke March in the 90s. I've done the Dyke March. There were no men. There was no men doing drag.
Right.
I mean, in the 90s, I mean, I did go. Vancouver had this one place that had 3 bars in it. The Lotus Club was a lesbian bar. It was in the basement, and just above that was Chuck's Pub, which was a drag bar. And then there was Charlie's Blues Lounge, which was gays and lesbians, and sometimes their straight friends would go in there. And now the Charlie's Blues is like it's a very straight sports bar. I don't even know what the Chuck's Pubs is, and they don't even.
They call themselves the Lesbian Nights Straight.
Yeah. In 2019, I went to 3. I signed up to 3 lesbian speed dating events, and one of them there was a 20-something-year-old man who'd had chest surgery, and like I'm in my 50s, and I got this 20-something-year-old man leaning across the table trying to show surgical cleavage. You know, I'm not looking at that.
I mean.
Recently on my Vancouver meetup group, the woman who organizes that particular lesbian speed dating.
That's sexual harassment right there.
Yeah, lesbian speed dating. She told me on the meetup group in writing that I have an archaic sexuality, and she doesn't let men. She doesn't let cis men. Let's look at that word for a minute.
They're men with pronouns. I mean, what's the difference?
Yeah.
Rainbow penises, glitter wands.
Yes, glitter families are grooming. In the 90s, it was chosen families where we looked out for each other because we were exiled or ran away from families. Glitter families is trying to lure kids from families, and with kids.
This is just predator, sex trafficking, grooming.
Yeah. So.
And harassment of lesbians.
Recently, she told me I had an archaic sexuality, cis. So. The first syllable from sister, from sister, from sissy boy, co-opting those, and then bizarrely going to Latin and chemistry with the word cis, which means on the side of, which is still a difference, a barrier, a boundary, and pretending that it's not even that, creating this bizarre double-edged slur that everyone else is supposed to feel bad that we're not trans.
Yeah, I don't feel bad, and I don't care if I'm being called transphobic. I'm proud of it. Like, come on, I know reality.
Yeah, I had a meetup where this woman showed up, and it's a lesbian meetup. Then the first thing she did was flirt with the male waiter because he looked like the American actor John Hamm. I was so embarrassed.
love
I
you.
have not even gone back to this restaurant. Then when she realized I was not pro-trans, she started crying at the table that she was on the Pride Society board and they had done a survey that trans was the biggest part of the homeless population.
Which is a lie, but...
Yeah. And I looked at her and I said, well, I work for government and that flies in the face of decades of work with the homeless across every Western nation that shares data.
Yeah.
And the homeless population is actually a bigger percentage of the overall population than the trans population is. So that's impossible.
Of course.
When you ask a poor question, you get garbage data like that. Garbage in, garbage out is a very well.
Statistics. That's a whole trans movement right there for sympathy.
Well, okay, statistics. When I was in college, the statistics textbook was called How to Lie with Statistics. How to Lie with Statistics.
Right.
You know, and this whole lesbians having to caretake everybody else is exhausting. On Instagram, when I was briefly on that platform, I had someone explain to me that gays and lesbians were the parents of non-binary.
No.
And I said, you don't understand what gay and lesbian means if you think that is a sexually reproducing activity that generation. And so it's part of it is every generation rebels against the generation before it. And we are in the first time in human history where we have too many generations alive at the same time. And we have more of a human population than ever before. And the balance of the human population has shifted to urban centers. And so that sort of anxiety, you know, pushes a lot out. And this is where gays and lesbians become very beneficial to society because we are not actually contributing to overpopulation. And we are putting more back into the community resources wise than we take out. You know, to me, it was really striking when COVID happened and there was a picture from the CDC. Yeah, there's no reason to rebel against gays and lesbians. Gays and lesbians weren't harming trans. You know, I mean,
every generation battle.
Yeah, I mean, the December 9 Coalition in the 90s invited trans groups to join, and we didn't even have a trans policy. We thought we can't even discuss that without any individuals here, and none of them would even join. The group lasted for the group lasted for a few years, and it was from the December 9 Coalition that I actually met Barbara Findlay. And Barbara Findlay is the lesbian lawyer in Vancouver that represented the man calling himself the one who sued the Yeah, so she's the one who ended Vancouver rape relief for women, and she is the one who is representing the Nurses College against Amy Hamm currently. That actually gives me some more material. How long do you want this to go on? Because I'm just seeing the clock but I have to work this one in.
I have time.
Yeah, you know, in addition to the FEMAX Thursdays, there's also Here She Fridays. And
Here She
is a regular Zoom. It's an action group. So it's boots on the ground, women,
people do paperwork, and
we compile different actions that can be easily done from home. Like here's a list of current petitions.
You need to send me that link.
Yeah. So on Fridays we meet and we go through all of these things and we do all these little. Here's an action we can do for a minute. Here's an action we can do for 2 minutes. Let's talk about a business association campaign. Let's talk about what we can do as a government.
What's the action going?
You know, and in fact, in Canada and America, any citizen can walk into a government office and say, I'm a citizen. I would like to see whatever it is you're allowed to show me that you do. I would just like to have a little walk around, and they have to do it. You know, even police.
You're paying the taxes.
Yeah.
Make them work for you.
Yeah. In fact, in one department, I was called to reception because I worked at Library Square, and Library Square is the most photographed building in Vancouver. It looks like a Roman Colosseum with a tower. Now, the tower is the federal building, and the Colosseum is the public library and provincial offices. So this man showed up, and his wife, as it turned out, he was an American. And I was the person who gets called for these types of things. And so his wife was a medical doctor from a Utah hospital, and she had read about the green roof on the top of Library Square. And he wanted to get some photos of it. So I actually took him to my workstation because I had a fantastic view, and he got photos, and she ended up getting the Utah hospital to do a green roof project as well, which is, a really great thing. So that's where I'm just sort of encouraging. So it's like, it's
an action you can take.
You're just curious. You're just curious. You're allowed to.
Take ownership of your community and the public spaces.
One of the things that he or she is involved in right now is a British Columbia Human Rights Commission on behalf of a woman who had been in a shelter run by the Salvation Army.
Okay.
So there's a BC human rights complaint against the Salvation Army for their gender ID policy endangering
a lot of men who violate these women.
Yeah. So this was part of the peaking for me as well, is women not being able to access services, the bathrooms, finding out about women in prison. I found more stuff online, and women talking about the trans widows. So if dead name is a legitimate term, then till death do us part means that should be automatic grounds for divorce.
Exactly. You're no longer the same person.
Yes. So there's that.
But they married.
Now that is something I have written and
I would say it's more false advertisement. But
yes, it is. It absolutely is. And especially actually having watched the Amy Ham hearing where the man, Dr. James Canner, who is trying to make pedophilia a sexual orientation, and we should not
never stop.
That. No, we should not be allowing it, because children cannot give consent. Children do not understand the consequences, and children afraid to grow up. Puberty is not pathology. And I'm going to credit Shannon as a call out from here she, because that's totally her phrase that I've been hashtagging. When I did write, and so again, the medical profession has ethics committees. They have regulatory boards. They have schools.
The boss of their boss.
Yeah. Individual schools, school boards, regional school districts.
Or anyone can write.
Education ministries. I wrote to all of the education ministries across Canada. Only Quebec wrote me.
Share links. I'm more than happy to share with my audience where you write.
Yes. Now, when I wrote to the school board, when I wrote to the school ministries, I was also able to draw on some more Canadian history. And in Canada, there was 2 school incident things that happened in British Columbia that I reminded them of. One is very difficult to find any information online, and I happen to live nearby this elementary school, but it's very well known in the city of Surrey. The elementary school is named James Ardeal.
Okay.
And in the early 90s, a single dad moved to BC from Ontario, and the boy went to school and tried to get in with the cool kids and told the school tough that he could get him drugs. And he took money, and he spent the money, and he could not get drugs. So the school tough, in front of at least 50 children, caved the boy's head in with a rock and left his body in a park. 800 school children all knew the boy was dead. They knew who did it, and not a single one. And I am not blaming these children.
No,
they were
it's not probably the children.
Not a single child.
Teacher, where are the staff? Where's everybody else?
Yeah. The body was found 6 weeks later by a jogger, and then the children told that they were terrified. And one of the things the children said was they didn't think they would be believed, and also if they told, they would be next. Now, this followed an incident where the man's name is Robert Noyes. He was an elementary school teacher who went through 5 elementary schools before the 5th elementary school principal stopped him.
Wow.
He was actually molesting children in the classroom.
You don't get in there in school. You don't get in there a child.
Yeah. And all of
right there.
Yeah. And all of the children who told, none of the adults would believe them. So this was another thing why I did not blame the James Ardeal students. So when I wrote to the ministry, I explained that these incidents
failed.
Yeah, so education cannot pretend, and this was before the Ontario balloon tit shop teacher. I mean, this is the thing. Men, gay men doing drag, lesbians have told them to stop it because it is mockery of women.
Yeah.
Whereas women who do drag king stuff are not doing it to be disgusting about
No,
men.
it's to idolize.
Celebrating what is sort of vaguely appealing. I mean, as a child, I've been it's difficult to be an Elvis Presley fan with all I know about Elvis Presley, but
Right.
I have,
You knew
since
all
I
that.
was 9, I am 2 weeks older than Lisa Marie Presley should still be. And so this is the thing. Dressing up in clothes and performing is theater.
Right.
Dressing up in stuff and being in your bedroom doing stuff with another person or by yourself is your private business. And gender ID is to walk up to someone and say, not only do you have to ignore your ordinary human senses, but I'm going to talk about my genitals to you, and it's the only discussion I have. That's sexual harassment. And it is not any different from someone walking up to you and going, my religion says you're a bad person and I'm a good person.
Exactly.
That's the only topic that I'm going to talk about.
And the only acceptable answer is play along with my
and in this way it's a compulsion.
dogma.
Yes, and exactly. Marriages, and in fact, marriages should be annulled. I mean, the man Bruce Jenner, who was an Olympic gold medalist, as the fastest running man, and then he marries 3 women that he does not tell them ahead of time, and each one of them he does a big reveal, him in a dress. And these women did not communicate and warn each other, and they actually knew each other. Like Bruce Jenner's second wife was a woman named Linda Thompson. Her first boyfriend was Elvis Presley. And so then she goes from Bruce Jenner to Canada's David Foster, and she was with him for 19 years. And I read Linda Thompson's book, and it's just like, you can't walk up to a woman and say, hey, now you're a lesbian. And no.
This is not true.
Yeah, and the actress Stockard Channing
I mean,
was in a
political
TV movie
lesbians.
called Normal, where, the husband goes through this, and it's like, oh, then you just have to always support him. I did start to wonder, why were there all these support groups for gay men who had left women, and that there was nothing for women who got left by gay men? I mean, that's a woman who's just had her primary reproductive capacity in young life wasted on a man who is not going to be there in the, the golden years.
He's the baby maker.
Yeah.
There's a lot of FACTfems in this community that think lesbians should just team up with gay men and have 2 of them in your life forever. I'm like, no, I'm sorry, I'm not.
No, gay men are still men, and it is really, it's the unappealing body proportions.
Why would lesbians want 2 men? You only have to deal with 1. Like, no.
Voices. Yeah, it's attraction to and between women. And it's not, because I'm scared of men. It's men are boring. They are not interesting. They are predictable and demanding. And
it's just not attracted. I mean, it's just not.
Yeah.
Thing,
Yeah. And if you have to talk yourself into somebody, that's your brain telling you not to do it. One of the most disturbing things I had was at a meetup, this woman in her 30s showed up, and she was going on about how, well, there's nothing wrong with trans. You just have to, ignore you just have to ignore those uncomfortable feelings. And I said, you do realize your body is telling you are in danger, and you are ignoring your brain's natural.
It's a great response. Yeah. That's BDSM, like, brainwashes you not to.
Yeah. And I said to her, okay, let's do a thought experiment. You paid $50. You pay $50 to go to lesbian speed dating. It's you and 19 trans women. How many dates do you go on? And she went, well, none, but I might have interesting conversations that evening. And I said, and that's a good use of your lesbian speed dating entertainment dollars.
Right. You wasted all that time. You got dressed. You were excited. And then.
Yeah.
For that, I would have went to, like.
Yeah, it's because here's the
And
other thing is, you know,
oh, we went to a strip club full of dudes.
Yeah,
So
I
how
mean,
could they hate on you? Like, come on.
and this bizarre argument of if you are momentarily,
First of
if
all,
you
maybe.
see someone from across the room and you think you might be attractive, well, you're obligated to have sex with them.
No, you're not.
No, that is not how lesbians think. That is how men think, and they're not thinking beyond, you know.
And if I can get close and I realize there's a lot of things I don't find attractive, it's not happening.
Yeah. Yeah, and you know, and more often than not, a lesbian will say no to herself and not even go to an event, or she'll talk herself out of it. I mean, one of the lesbian speed datings I went to in 2019, this one woman actually sat out in the
I just
corner.
won't go because there's men there. Like,
Yeah, I mean, yes, at least this one was all women.
then I'd be there.
Twice there was actually a few of them were bisexual women who were married to men, and it's like, I
Right.
don't think you should be in lesbian speed dating.
The word lesbian is the first word there.
Yeah, I mean, single bisexual woman who wants to date other women, okay, sure, you can be there. But if you're already attached to a man, you know,
maybe this isn't the group for you. They have their own things. Trust me.
No,
They have their own events.
I had this woman looking at me and she's explaining that her and her husband have 2 kids and he has 2 girlfriends. And she's looking at me and I'm like, yeah, my relationship is not going to depend on his zipper. You know, that's just no. Hey, Katie Jean.
Thank you.
From FEMAX. So
FEMAX, where we all met.
Yeah, I was actually going to do on FEMAX my elevator story, so I have to save that for the FEMAX. So
that is tomorrow night.
Yeah,
after
exactly.
With Skylar.
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing: is if you know, you get ask me for a date and I say no, and your response is to name call me, then thank you for validating my no and letting me know what a bad relationship choice you are.
And lesbians don't have this, like, you know, if I asked out a woman and she said no, okay, no, thank you. I get on to the next one.
Yes.
Have fun.
Yes. In fact, my revamped lesbian flirting workshop, the first lesson is how to say the word no.
That
and
should be
just say the word no.
Any girl a little girl should be taught no. That should be like the first words before she interacts with other people that you should teach.
Yeah. Yes, because, you know, if you don't know how to say no, then you end up being harmed because you can't just trust. I mean, there's reasons. This is where my new one is too, is little boys do not go into the men's bathrooms for the sex predator reasons who are now being invited into the women's.
Yeah.
You know, and whatever role play, I just saw one of the chat comments flash up there.
Yes.
You know, whatever role play people want to do in their private relationship, that's fine up to them. And, you know, the thing about lesbians is, you know, with straight couples, people end up falling into, you know, certain personality types and certain roles. And in gay men, it is, you know, it's more about who's is bigger than the paycheck part. And for lesbians, it tends to be, you know, it can be a lot more mixed. It's, you know, personality, you know, based. The person who drives the car is not necessarily the same one who squishes the spiders.
No, it's always been balanced, you know?
You know, and every woman should most importantly know how to manage her finances and not be beholden or dependent on anyone else, you know, regardless.
This is great advice.
Yeah, I mean, being able to speak money and to speak numbers, and when words lose meaning, then numbers like statistics have no meaning. In the 1990s, one of the things the December...
That's why trans never makes any sense, because it's nonsense.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that the December 9 Coalition did in the 90s was file a BC human rights complaint against Statistics Canada. And the 2 lawyers who were in the December 9 Coalition, one of which was Barbara Findlay, did not actually write the complaint because the 2 lawyers didn't want a lawyer volunteer when lawyer is, you know, paid professional time. And fair enough. Yeah. You know, when you do something for work, doing it as your volunteer thing is a bit of a chore. And this is where it's like, it's better to actually, you know, transfer skills. And this is the tragic part of gender ID is now lesbians are isolated from lesbians. I have not.
Yeah.
It's 2024.
Well, we're building the community.
I've lived in Vancouver for 5 years. I have never in my life ever had a difficult time making friends before in my life. And, you know, to be sent out of lesbian groups because I don't think men can be lesbians is
Contact me or Amanda on Twitter, because we are doing a weekly lesbian conversation about building our community.
Yeah, I mean, it is absolutely crazy to be told this, and I've just lost my train.
You have to go back to underground. This is something we've been through before, though.
Yeah, I mean, it was when we were illegal. That's the difference, though. When we were illegal, we knew we were illegal. When we're being told
we have a facade of legality now, but you're not really allowed to legally be a lesbian.
Yeah. And it gets back to the gaslighting part, you know, and the
rights to assembly is just not respected.
Well, yes, and you know, and so all right, Statistics Canada. Statistics Canada originally, when we were having the battle when we were having the human rights complaint with them as the December 9 coalition, we had a meeting with them. So we had the director of family statistics, and he was saying that yes, the censuses they didn't include the data because gays and lesbians began writing in. We just started writing on the census form the information.
Yeah.
And they weren't sharing that information, and they admitted that they didn't know how to count us, as if counting numbers were different depending on the demographics of individuals you were counting.
It's just numbers.
And they said what baffled them was when it was like, oh, they indicated there were children in the house, so they just thought it was straight people who were confused that they were roommates, and somehow they were confusing that by saying married. It was confusing to them.
A long time ago.
And so there was silence. This was in the days where it was telephone conferencing, so there was no faces. The telephone was sitting on the table, and we were all staring at the telephone in shock at this. Are straight people really so unwilling?
Well, they don't know how to count this either because they think
this is their cognitive dissonance that math somehow works differently because there's sex involved somehow. And so I was the first one who spoke in the silence, and I said, 4 of the individuals on our side of the phone call have children. Sometimes gays and lesbians are out of marriages, or they have children with each other, or
reproduction works regardless. Sometimes it's a rape. I mean, it does happen.
Yeah, yes, and also that, yes. And so basically they were acting like somehow we don't know how to describe our own lives in words that should be understandable. Now, in the 90s...
It's not trans, which is...
Now, this is the funny part. In the 90s, the religious people who were opposed to marriage equality argued that unless sexuality was proven scientifically, they were not going to accept it. Yet, at the same time, heredity of ethnicity was proven scientifically, and they were still racist. So the argument that they would accept this doesn't really hold, and also it doesn't matter in terms of...
when had the religion made an argument that actually made sense to begin with?
In terms of law, and again, blindfold on or off, it doesn't matter. It should not matter if sexual orientation is genetically encoded, or it becomes life experience or whatever. Or someone's conscious choice. It doesn't matter in terms of law.
What does it matter?
It matters in terms of relationship. Because my whole thing with the bi-curious is, what if they stop being curious partway through? I'd rather just not start. You call me when you figured it out.
And a lot of us started off, calling ourselves bi-curious.
If you're sure you're attracted, then there's a yes. If you're not, then the answer's no. And if there's any doubt, then no is always the best bet. And this is where, again, the very male thing of, this is why they are not lesbians, they're not women, and all women are not bisexual.
Well, that's because they don't want it. They don't want to believe there's any woman outside of their reach. Let's just be honest.
They also don't want, and they also want to define everything in the world around them. I mean, this current idea that biology is somehow colonial or made up by Europe, biology existed before humans existed.
It is why humans exist.
Yeah, I mean, one of the dumbest trans claims I have heard was from a British talk show where this man in a dress was claiming that prehistoric animals before dinosaurs decided what humans would be like. No, there was no guarantee humans would exist.
No, of course not.
We can credit humans for our own human behavior, and there are certain other, species
Anything that
groups
takes
that
this much
we can
gymnastics
look
is
at.
just nonsense.
Yes, this whole bi NB pan poly. When I get told that, what I hear is, I have borderline personality disorder and do not know how to distinguish between abuse and affection, and will take it from anybody. And that's someone who is just that's red flagging again.
Well, I just think it's pretentious bisexuals.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's that, and when you first meet someone, sexual orientation isn't necessarily the first thing that you want to introduce yourself as. Although I did in the '90s used to say, "Hi, I'm Nina. I'm a lesbian," to see who would not shake my hand.
Okay.
But that was a different decade.
I'm a perf, and let's see who.
Well, in your 20s, in your 20s, it's exciting. You're finally not a teenager. You get to adult, and they don't tell you that it's adulting. Adults don't really tell younger adults what adulting is really like. And when I was in my 30s, being still treated like I was a kid was really weird, and I try to not do that to those who are younger, because I do.
I had that issue.
Yeah, I mean, younger people have a lot more access to information in ways that we didn't have. I'm glad that when I was first on the internet, it was still like in a DOS internet.
And in many ways, they grew up faster because of all they know, but at the same time, they learned so much nonsense. It's like,
yeah,
they didn't have to process it all, so they're completely immature about it.
No, the comment about autism and stuff is also a really good thing. Now, autism is, for most of my life, has been something that men have been labeled with, and I know Asperger syndrome goes back a long way. And there's also, I believe, I personally believe there's some overlap with that, and PTSD, acquired how you are after PTSD, and you are different as a person. As a teenager, I was diagnosed as manic depressive, which is often a flag for that, and chronic depression and a major depression. And so I've collected most of them on the bingo card. But I also tend to think that it's less depression and more a response to the oppression, because of, Sigmund Freud only had like 5 patients. Women. 2 of them were like over correspondents, and 1 of them was himself. And just because he had to think for his thing and projected doesn't mean, he shouldn't project onto everybody else.
Okay, well, I think we should last a little, like another 10 minutes. We'll go till like 9 o'clock. How about that?
How long do your usually go? Okay, let me see if I can think of one more. One
more story you want to share with the audience?
Yeah, well, I posted. I guess I'll go back to the atheist theme. I posted a dinner meetup for atheist skeptics, and I had a woman say that she wanted to join this, and then when she found out I was not trans inclusive, she told me I was not cool.
Okay, did it hurt your feelings?
First, I'm not a teenager, so that's not a threat. Second, I'm a science fiction geek. I have never been cool. Not worried about it. And so I told her on the meetup group that if catering to cotton ceiling is what makes one cool, then I am very okay with not being cool.
Yeah.
And
I'm sorry, but I'm original punk. We're not posers.
Yeah, I mean,
you don't care about anyone's approval either. Like, give me a break.
I mean, these men are demanding to be treated in a way that lesbians do not treat themselves.
No.
And there's a man in Vancouver, and I won't say the name he's pretending to use.
I don't need to tell you.
And I was not at this meetup. I heard about this meetup after the fact, but he showed up. He's over 6 feet tall. I have met him. He's over 6 feet tall, and he showed up in pink, and with this little tiny pink purse that he put on the table. Of course, they have to little scrote sack.
Put it on
and
display.
Kept giggling about how pink and feminine the purse was. And now, I'm not saying I have met a lot of actual high-power femme lesbians.
I don't need to prove that I'm a woman by doing
I do not think that they sit around gushing about little pink purses. And
Okay, maybe my ex did, but still.
Nobody has to
It's not
cater
a
to
validation
anybody
thing.
else's self-image. You know, you get to see ordinary human senses, no university degree required. Yeah.
I only tell you what your opinion of me should be.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know?
You just
Nor do
don't.
I care. I mean, I would like to be pleasant, but if it's not, I'm not going to die inside because I value myself for who I am.
Now, I did have a meetup where I posted. I was trying to do my lesbian flirting workshop, so I posted at a restaurant that I could walk to from
That's
my
great.
house. And I went there a half an hour before the
that
event.
Should be a topic on our next chat.
Oh, that can be a next time one, yes. But basically, only a man showed up. He was wearing a baggy tracksuit, and he'd had a chest surgery, so it looked like he had little Tyrannosaurus Rex arms underneath his clothes.
Okay.
And blue hair is a clue, yeah.
Okay. Well, I used to have blue hair. I started most of these trends without even knowing it.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
Well, I was surprised because usually it's blue for girls and pink for boys and also green for girls. So those are usually the hair color ones I've just decided to veer clear of on the street. And I have actually had the experience.
Like if they don't shower, you know it's true.
Yeah,
if they shower, then most likely they're punk.
Well, it's not just them. It's also straight people who are mimicking. I saw two straight couples. The boys had pink hair. The girls had blue hair. And they were wearing jeans and white T-shirts and leatherish jackets and looking like their little James Dean act wasn't good. And they're looking at me all threatening and menacing. And it's like, what I have to worry about being beaten up by people who presume to be in my community now.
I know. It's no longer. We're no longer safe in our community. We're told to get out.
Yeah, gay men owe lesbians, and bisexual men gave straight women AIDS, and we don't have anything in common with them, and
we gotta get the L out. That's one of the most important messages, and we need to rebuild our community without the toxic tea. I mean, once a woman gets herself out of the cult, I'm more than glad to welcome her back in. But now while she's promoting trans, it's just too toxic.
The 1970s lesbians were right. The 1970s lesbian separatists were right. And you get the last word because this is your show.
Well, thank you very much, Nina, for joining me on this journey and giving advice to all our audience on what they should be doing, writing the letters, doing the work. I want to pay tribute to all the women who are not getting the fame, not getting the attention, but don't need it. They just want to do the right thing. What happened to doing the right thing for the right reasons? Like, I don't need like views or like audience. No, I need to end trans. That's what we need to do and focus on. And thank you so much for fighting for women and girls. See you very soon. And thank you everyone who joined us. Peace out.